The Colts offseason is here. Good Wednesday. As Eddie Garrison claps. Yeah, it's been, quite the year for the Indianapolis Colts. I'm Kevin Bowen. Eddie Garrison is across the way. And yes, we are here on a late Wednesday morning. I hate it. I don't know if we've ever done in the history of Kevin's Corner, but we won't talk about the game that just happened. Like I see little reason to waste your time on that. And I don't love it, but that's the reality of when you're 4-12-1. Quite the ending on Sunday afternoon, though. But the offseason is here. Jeff Saturday and players chatted on Monday. Chris Ballard chatted on Tuesday. And with that, we felt like it was time to recap things. And, unless the Colts are blown away here early on, I think it could be kind of a quiet news cycle for the Colts. I say that, and we'll have an emergency pod here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon today. But Eddie, a whole lot to unpack from Chris Ballard yesterday. We'll get into the 5 interview requests so far for the Colts, share some thoughts. I think if you are a fan of keeping Gus Bradley around, there's a candidate that stands out to me on that list. So we'll touch on that here in a little bit. But Eddie, good to see you, man.
Nice to see you as always. And first and foremost, I want to get this out here while we still have people listening in the front. Thank you to everybody for bearing with us through the entire season of what was an unprecedented times that we found ourselves in with the pod and with the Colts in general. So we thank you for watching, listening, and interacting each and every single week, and encourage you to keep doing that through the offseason. Glad
you said that. Thank you for doing that. I tweeted out last night, I know this year sucked for Colts fans. And there's a lot of people that probably tuned us out, which I understand that aspect of fandom. I mean, I am a huge Notre Dame basketball fan, and I'm like, God, do I really want to watch them tonight? And they stink. So I fully understand it, but I've said it numerous times. I think fandom is awesome. I think it's great that people have passions. And obviously without it, I don't have a job, so maybe I'm selfish in that, but I love seeing it. I love experiencing it, the highs and the lows of it. Certainly some lows this past year, but with the end of the season brings a glimmer of hope, I think, Eddie. I mean, we're still a long way away from real hope and tangible things and on-paper results, of course, but you've taken a step forward into a new era. And what that era will look like over the next X amount of months, obviously we'll break it all down for you. But with, the incomplete pass to end the game from Sam Ehlinger on Sunday, it's brought an ounce of hope. So let's begin with the Ballard presser. What I liked, what I didn't like. Shout out to Jason, loyal listener, who said, I think that's how you should break it down tomorrow. And I'm like, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. There's a whole lot to unpack from Ballard yesterday. So, Eddie, whatever I had queued up there to lead us off, go ahead.
What he needed to do.
He needed to be humble, and he needed to play that humility role. And I thought he played that. I'm not going to sit here and give him a standing ovation for apologizing that he was bad at his job. That just, in a way, it's like, hey, Mom and Dad, here's my 1.2 GPA. Aren't you proud of me? No, you're going to sit here and be like, I apologize, I'll do better, et cetera, et cetera. So, he should have done that.
I do have a question about that, though. It's a second consecutive off-season press conference where he's like, this is on me.
Right.
This is my fault. We'll learn from it. We'll get better. Where are we learning, and where are we getting better?
Well, 2 things on that front. And I'll get into the roster construction question and answer that he and I had a back and forth on here in a few minutes, but I tweeted out a screenshot of the 2 answers from the same question I've asked him now back-to-back Januaries. The fact that I'm asking that question in back-to-back Januaries is not a good thing. The fact that he's answering it with that's a good question, I need to look deeper into that, is probably not a good thing either for the organization. I found myself in the early part of that press conference, because I always try to do this in the press conference. I always try to kind of set the scene, take a picture of whoever is up there, let the followers know of hey, this is the setting right now, is what you're about to see unfold on your timeline. Eddie, I thought to myself, wow, it's kind of amazing he's up there right now. He's going into his 7th year as general manager. And we all know the resume. The resume is no division titles in the easiest division in football. It's 1 playoff win. The approach and position investment doesn't win in today's NFL. And in an offensive-heavy league, you just had one of the worst offensive years you'll ever see in the NFL. And again, what he believes in, O-line and D-line, D-line certainly a little better than the O-line, but I would argue neither is at the level that, considering how much you've invested into the group, you're getting the return that you need. So there was probably a 2-minute period in his opening statement where I'm just kind of sitting there and being like, man, this is kind of crazy he's here. Mm-hmm. In the NFL, you don't see people get a 7th year with a resume like that. And again, it's not like, Eddie, the Colts just went 7-9 with the young emerging quarterback that you're just waiting to have a Herbert 3rd year, a Tua 3rd. It's not like there's this ascension. It's been a descension, if that's a word. Mm-hmm. It's going the other way. So I did kind of find myself, right or wrong, doing that. And again, Ballard, I thought, handled it just fine. He's a smart dude.
You don't have to worry about him not saying the right thing at a press conference.
It says a lot about Brian Kelly. Behind a mic, there's a politician background of Brian Kelly. I don't know if Chris has politics in his background, but he knows what he's doing up there. And he knows how he looked 2 months ago. Yeah, I've said this before. He looked kind of like how Rosie looks when she doesn't share her toy. You can't pout. You're 4-12-1. You need to handle it from a humility standpoint, contrite, whatever word you want to throw in there. And I thought he handled that. One pushback I had kind of on the opening statement was just like, I don't know if he said this in the open, but I thought he did. I didn't really understand the whole everybody wants to cancel you when things don't go well.
Yeah.
I get that cancel culture is this juicy phrase all of a sudden in today's lexicon, but based off the NFL and that business, the bottom line business of the NFL, again, if you show someone a general manager resume that Chris Ballard has produced through 6 seasons, you don't get a 7th year.
Nope.
80-90% of the time. So I didn't okay, adversity,
It gets off on it.
Yeah, that comment, I was just like, oh geez, boy, I gotta hide under the laptop for.
Oh yeah, because we can't see
7 or 8 seconds.
We can't see you guys in terms of the media. How did you guys all take that when he just kind of leisurely says, and I kind of get off on it?
Yeah, and he was referring to, for those that missed it, which boy, he was referring to adversity or, a difficult situation, and I need to get ourselves out of that difficult situation.
Yeah, it was in response to if he ever thought about leaving Indy, he goes, no, I'm here to stay.
There's no transfer portal, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought to myself, man, that will be memed out very quickly.
Yep.
I haven't seen it yet, but I never doubt social media, so I know it's only a matter of time on that front. So, again, I thought he handled it fine. His approach was fine. So I guess that's kind of the first thing.
Yeah. Roster construction, we kind of briefly went into that, but let's dive a little bit more into it in terms of what he had to say on his belief of going forward at the current, thought process of building it up front in the trenches.
Yeah, and again, he is very adamant that will continue to kind of be on the gravestone. And he said that, but I also felt like I heard, and maybe, I don't know if this is me wanting to hear it, but I think I heard a little bit more of an open-mindedness to do some things differently.
I did
and
too.
There were a couple of tidbits you can pull out in about 45 minutes where he says the plan from a roster standpoint wasn't good enough and there will be changes. He didn't say there will be changes 13 times throughout it, but the fact that he just said it a couple times lends me to think there will be.
And the plan failed.
Some personnel changes. And yes, the plan failed. The word that I thought he used, which you guys have heard me say this about him, and I thought it was interesting that he said it about himself.
I wonder if he's listening to you again, Bowen.
He used the word stubborn. And that's exactly how I would describe him when it comes to this process. He is stubborn. And, when him and I have had a few back and forths in these sort of settings, some of it is also just I'm curious why he thinks the way he does. And we'll get into quarterback a little bit, but quarterback is one of those. But I'm because he is a very fascinating football mind to me. I do have a lot of respect for many of the things that he shares, and he is pretty introspective and detailed about those things. So it's more of just I don't get it at times, and when I do, have questions or kind of push back on that. Again, the roster philosophy of I'm going to examine it hard, we're going to move forward, and we're going to grow. Now we're in the kind of see it I'll believe it when I see it sort of phase of the offseason. Yesterday, all he could do was words and body language, and he did that very well. Now it's what happens when you get to March, and how that unfolds into the draft as well. But I just have this inkling that there will be some notable personnel changes. Like, I don't think it's just going to be plug in the draft pick of a quarterback at 4 or 1 or wherever.
Do you have any specific players that come to mind?
I want to think more about that. I think there are some pretty obvious names you can look at contractually, age-wise, and kind of pair together. And I think maybe just kind of a different way of handling a free agency situation or building a little bit more cap space. Or, again, you can point to his free agent process, Eddie, and say, there's a hit, there's a hit, there's a hit. It's just kind of a reluctancy to
pay him again
and or try and hit more.
Yeah.
I mean, Stephon Gilmore was a great signing. Rodney McLeod, really good signing. Autry, if you want to go back a handful of years ago, obviously Autry would fall into the pay again camp. Eric Ebron, if you look at that contract, what you got out of him for 1 year until all hell broke loose, that was a great signing.
Yeah.
So you can point to, it's not that he's just routinely missed in free agency. Ryan Grigson missed a whole lot.
Was Grigson John Bostic? Because I feel like John Bostic even had a good year underneath the Colts.
Yeah, I want to say, boy, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. I think that was late Grigson for some reason. I don't know, maybe that was 2017 when Ballard just canned the whole defense and rebuilt everything on that front. I'm trying to think if that was post Terrell Freeman or what, but roster construction philosophy. You can find a lot of similarities in its answer from last January to this, but I do think there were some slight differences. We'll see how the actions play off of that.
If you have nothing else on roster construction, let's move on to the head coach searching comments. Obviously, he's not going to go too deep into it because he doesn't want to put the cards on the table, but he was asked about if a head coach needed to have any experience, and he says no, and I'm glad he said no because if he said yes, then I'm assuming you guys would have all just would have jumped on him. It's like, oh, what about Saturday then?
Which I thought his answer about Saturday said a whole lot and how much voice he had.
John Bostic, 2017.
To that. Okay, so he was part of that massive rebuild going from the 3-4 to the 4-3. Ballard had a phrase, Eddie, that I really liked that he used, and I think it was kind of his first words out when asked about what will you be looking for in a head coach, or what have you learned maybe from the 2018 coaching process. And the phrase was, don't start with an end in mind.
Yes.
I like that a lot. If you guys have heard me talk about Jeff Saturday and Jim Irsay's relationship and the search for a permanent head coach over the last month, something you've heard me say often is this: be open-minded. Don't rush to Jeff Saturday's hire. Eddie, does Arizona want to interview Jeff Saturday?
Probably not.
Does Carolina?
No, they're about to interview Frank Reich, though. They made that announcement today. Schefter.
Does Houston?
No.
Nobody. So you don't need to jump to any sort of conclusions with Jeff Saturday. He's going to be there. My morning co-host Jake Query says this often. Jeff Saturday is kind of the safety school. I think it's probably a good way to describe him in regards to the other candidates. Shane Steichen's a name that I know you like. I mean, he's being rumored in a couple of different areas. Gio Avero from the Broncos. Again, that name being thrown around a few more.
Aaron Glenn with the defensive coordinator of the Lions, and Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of the Lions.
Yeah, so again, some of these guys are a little bit more sought after, but don't start with an end in mind. Be open-minded. And again, in 2018, the dude interviewed Matt Rule probably a year or two away before Matt Rule really had serious NFL traction. So Ballard has shown precedent where he will think outside the box. I love that. This is such an unbelievable opportunity you have as a GM to seek out candidates, get intel, find out what a staff might look like for these candidates, learn different things. Do you look at what Raheem Morris says in an interview and what Ben Johnson says in an interview and say, man, if I could combine that somehow? Yeah, I love what when Johnson said about this. I love what Morris says about this. That creates ideas to where then when you make that hire, you throw to that coach, hey, have you ever thought about it like this? It's such a awesome time to learn, to gather intel. utilize that. And I trust Ballard to do that. I think he'll be very patient in this process. Sure, does there come a point in time where a candidate might say, hey, it's either you guys or I'm taking the job here? Sure, then you got to show your cards. But for now, milk it. Milk the process. It's frustrating for us because we want answers, we want clarity, but absolutely milk it. Wide net, like you said, Eddie, no head coaching experience, or head coaching experience is not a prerequisite. Open to college coaches, all of those things. He said all of that. I do think the area that Jeff Saturday has strength in, that is an area that Chris Ballard will look for, and we see this in all coaching hires. You see a 180 from the previous candidate. You see a 180 from Frank Reich. And I think a little bit more of a demonstrative personality, a little bit more of a, I'm not afraid to rip you sort of personality, I do think that'll be something that is looked into. And again, I think this is very natural in any sort of coaching process. I mean, in our market, look at the Indiana Pacers. In resume and in voice, think from Frank Vogel to Nate McMillan to Nate Bjorkgren to Rick Carlisle.
Yeah.
None of those back-to-back hires were ever the same. If you look at, I think right now the early list for the Houston Texans, they just went with a couple of older hires in David Culley and Lovie Smith. I want to say all of their candidates right now are in their 40s or 30s. I just think it's natural for teams to, in any organization.
Okay, this guy didn't work.
Yeah, we need something very, very different. And so for Frank, I don't think it's necessarily side of the ball or offense, defense. I think it's how he held players accountable and wanting a little bit more of a louder voice. And I know that sounds like third grade screaming and yelling, but just
rah guy, I don't know.
Yeah, rah I think at times gets a little bit too negative of a connotation. They just think cheerleader and they don't know any X's and O's or something like that. But I just mean someone that's a little bit more willing to kind of light a fire. And you can do it in different ways, right or wrong. Obviously, there are coaches with a Frank Reich, Tony Dungy temperament that have had a lot of success in the NFL. I don't want to act like it's a must. But again, from what you just had, you probably want something different. And I think that is an element to Saturday's resume that Ballard likes. So I'm keeping in mind that throughout this process.
So you think Ballard would be open to a return of Jeff Saturday?
I'm not saying that. No. I think, well, first off, Jeff Saturday, Jim Irsay will make the final call. And I guess I'll just interject here before we get back into Ballard specifically. On the Saturday front, I don't understand how 1-7 and losses of historical proportions to end the year doesn't matter. I think acting like the Carolina situation is so vastly different than the Colts situation is extremely lazy. Carolina fired their defensive coordinator, traded away their best player, started P.J. Bleepin Walker for half of Steve Wilkes' games, and went 6-6. And if you looked at the Matt Rule start to this season for Carolina versus the Frank Reich start to the season, you could argue the Colts had a better football team under Reich than Carolina had under Rule. The Colts are 3-5-1.
Yep.
They'd beaten two playoff teams, Kansas City and Jacksonville. I know it sounds crazy. They hadn't gotten blown off the field to the level that Carolina had in the 2 weeks before they fired Rule. And if you wanted to, you could chalk up 3-5-1 and say, that's because that man is turning the football over at an extraordinarily high level in Matt Ryan. Mm-hmm. Carolina really didn't have that. And yet here comes Steve Wilkes, again, P.J. Walker and Sam Darnold and Baker. I mean, hell, Baker was gone. You could act like Baker ended up being gone. You could act like he was their most competent quarterback at the time, and he left. And yet they still go 6-6. If Jeff Saturday had gone 5-3, we'd be praising him to the nth degree. We'd be building a statue for him. But because the reverse happened, we can't evaluate that. And that was an odd answer. I asked Ballard yesterday, I go, where does 1-7? Where does that come in the evaluation process of Jeff Saturday? And he was like, pretty much it doesn't. And that was the one Saturday answer that I thought he was pretty lukewarm on him until that. And that was one I was like, man, are you just doing this because he's up in the Ring of Honor and you don't want to rip him? and you know the owner really likes him. That was a little bit odd to me. This is where I stand on Saturday. I think the late season embarrassment, I'd say entering Sunday's game, Eddie, I was probably 50-50 Saturday gets this job.
Yeah.
Permanently. Exiting, I'm less than that because I just think the continued embarrassment reached proportions that you can't go back on. Now, having said that, Chuck Pagano talked himself back into the head coaching job here in Indianapolis in front of Jim Irsay.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue Jeff Saturday has more of an emotional connection to Jim Irsay than Chuck Pagano did. And when is Jeff Saturday at his best?
Yep.
That's me tapping on a mic, if you guys can't hear that. What was Jeff Saturday's job before taking the Colts job?
Talking
on ESPN.
Yep.
That's when he's at his best. So does he talk himself back into, Jim Irsay, who has the final call? Those are the questions that I have on that front.
Is there anything more? Because you kind of went right into, or at least I led you straight into what you didn't like the first thing in Saturday messaging.
Yeah, I guess that kind of covers everything on the Saturday front. I asked him when the interim move was made, did you want to promote from within? And his short but sweet quote was, it never really got to that point. The discussion was Jeff, and when we decided to go that way, that's where we were going.
I thought he said when he decided to go that way.
Well, I think it was a we, and that pronoun is not a 50-50 split, if you follow where I'm going with that one.
Yeah.
I think that covers everything Saturday related on that. I guess one, not necessarily Saturday, I think this dates back to Reich, but I thought there was a phrase that Ballard used yesterday that I agreed with, and I have not heard this phrase used before to describe a football team, was the phrase competitive confidence.
Yep.
Our competitive confidence was gone. I would agree with that in listening to him describe it a little bit more. Eddie, the podcast we did before the start of the season, we laid out 3 points in why you should be optimistic about the Colts season, and then 3 of why you should be skeptical. Obviously, the optimistic points were a little bit more, at the time, relevant, you felt like easier to find, etc. The pessimistic ones were a little bit more of a search. But one of the real pessimistic ideas I had about the Colts entering the season was, how would this team perform with a bullseye on its back? In Vegas, they were the unquestioned AFC South favorite entering the year. How would they perform? And I think when he says competitive confidence, basically what he meant was within games, when shit got tough, we folded. And think about the runs that Dallas went on, that Minnesota went on, that the Giants went on. Even earlier in the season when you had Reich, things can snowball. And just there was an inability. I would argue this, Eddie. Outside of Stephon Gilmore, name me one Colt that made big plays in the fourth quarter this year.
Oh, my. I don't think anybody. Chase McLaughlin?
54 yards, baby, Chase on Sunday. Shout out to him. Alec Pierce's touchdown against Jacksonville. We are searching and searching.
Jelani Woods against Kansas City.
Just searching for an answer there. And I just think this team struggled when game pressure rose and the bullseye. From week one, they just struggled at being the AFC South favorite. You get down by 17 week one to Houston, a miracle comeback, you end the game in a tie, et cetera, et cetera. Week 2, you get shut out in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Quickly back to reality. Quickly back to trying to play as an underdog. And then for once, under Frank Reich, they didn't play well as an underdog. So I thought that was an interesting phrase that he used. Again, a little bit more Reich and Saturday related, but as we're talking about the coaching situation, I thought it was relevant to bring up then.
Point number 2 that you have on what you did not like, quarterback issues and how he addressed the issues.
So if you want to go positive, Eddie, you can go here. When he talked about the mistakes of the franchise, to be fair, a lot of it's like, we're looking into that right now. There were elements of the press conference I'm like, is this just going to be a we blame Frank Reich for everything, like we blame Carson Wentz for everything last year? I don't think it's there, but it's a thought that entered my mind during the presser. But
hey, he still talks to Frank, and they're good friends.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyways, the issues. The first mistake he said was a quarterback turnover. And I nodded my head internally. Yeah, yes, that to me seems rather obvious. Obviously, it's something I've brought up numerous times on this podcast. And honestly, last year in the playoffs, I think the popular thing that we saw as the playoffs unfolded was how can you look at these teams still standing? By the way, Rosie loves the song I'm Still Standing from Sing. It's now stuck in my head if anyone out there wants a song to get stuck in their head. How can you look at these teams and not acknowledge what the wideout position does for them? You know, the final 8 teams, the final 4 teams. You don't need to go over the wideouts that were left, but, I mean, bona fide studs. This year, you turn on the TV Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I guess Monday's an NFC game. You turn on next week and you watch an AFC game, look at those 7 quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
They're all under the age of 27.
All drafted, all
in the first round. Lamar Jackson being the latest of the 32nd pick. Again, we'll see if Jackson plays, Tua plays, etc. But obviously they started the vast majority of games for their franchises. 3 of the 7, giant trade-ups to get those quarterbacks. So, to me, I go back to a point I made earlier, and I would probably need to get Ballard a little bit more one-on-one to have this further conversation. He's always been hesitant to pull the trigger in the draft on a quarterback.
Yeah.
And where I am a little bit puzzled by that thought process is, Eddie, think about where he came from. I mean, he was one of the early members of the Chiefs organization to identify, do research, do homework on Patrick Mahomes. That was the 2016 college football season, entering the 2017 draft. Ballard leaves in January for the Colts GM gig. Obviously, Kansas City trades up in April for him. So we're such creatures of our own environments that I'm surprised that he didn't or hasn't looked at what's happened in Kansas City and thought, Andy Reid, one of the greatest offensive minds this league has ever seen, sat there and said, we get to the playoffs with Alex Smith, but we can't do anything when we're there. We got to do something different at that position. And they go out and make the move for Mahomes, and now look at him. It's one of the greatest.
Transformed the entire NFL, really.
Yeah, really. I mean, that's probably the accurate way to put it. And it's an unbelievable 5-year run that they've had in the AFC and in the NFL in general. So, again, when I hear some of that, I'm like, boy, like it's just confusing to me that they've operated at quarterback in this light. Again, he clearly has felt the team has been in position where stopgap's the way to go, and we're going to go short term, and we'll just figure it out. Sounded pretty willing to trade up to number 1.
I thought that was one of the more. I think that was one of the statements that he said with the most like conviction.
Yeah,
too.
I would agree on that. I would agree, but then he also had that answer about if I finally take one, you'll all praise it, and there's no guarantee that it works out. Kind of the old like. You just want me to take one just to take one, and then you'll rip me if the guy's a bust.
Yeah.
And he said that quite often in his tenure. And again, I sense a hesitancy and a reluctancy from him to do that. But I also am like, why take an NFL GM job if you have a hesitancy and a reluctancy to do that? Mm-hmm. That's what works. That's what gives you the best chance to have the sustained success. So if you're taking this job and you want to succeed at the highest level, the bat's got to come off your shoulders at some point. If you're not willing to swing at the pitch, then your average is going to be 157, and you better hope you get on base via walks and errors and that your teammates move you around. So, like, when you don't swing, you aren't giving your organization the best chance to win. And now I think you've reached a breaking point. And again, this is where I'm battling, like, is this me hoping Ballard does this, or is this me thinking he'll do it? But I think at some point, Eddie, you have to realize the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Yep.
The path that they've taken at quarterback has gone where?
Nowhere.
0 division titles, 1 playoff win. So isn't it time to go down the different path?
You would think so, right?
So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I was a little confused on the timeline he was mentioning about the year that they seriously thought about trading up for a quarterback. It was a question I asked him in relation to Kansas City, Buffalo. Why haven't you done that? I thought he referenced the 2020 draft.
He did.
Okay, so that would have been 13 overall, just to go over that draft for everybody. 2019 season, Jacoby 7-9 after Andrew Luck retires. You signed Phillip Rivers in whatever month that would have been, probably March, just before the start of free agency. Pretty much right when COVID was getting underway. Joe Burrow goes 1, Tua goes 5, Herbert goes 6. Of recent drafts, it's probably one of the few that you had teams at 2, 3, 4 not take a quarterback, and then 5 and 6 have turned out to be pretty good selections.
Yeah.
And Ballard mentioned that was a serious thought. And he threw in the caveat of, yes, while we seriously thought about it, I'm really, really happy with how DeForest Buckner has turned out. Eddie, DeForest Buckner's been a really good football player for the Colts.
He has
really
indeed.
And a really good human character, all of that. Durable, productive, all those things. DeForest Buckner, I would say, is played at a Pro Bowl level in his 3 years here. Call him a top, 5 defensive tackle in this league. You could push him up maybe a little higher than that, but let's just say, to be safe, call him top 5. And the team results with Buckner have been what? No division titles, no playoff wins.
Yeah. One appearance, right?
Yeah, just that first year. Played at Buffalo in that first year. If you would have traded up and used that 13th pick, and obviously you would have had to throw in an extra, but if that pick would have been a quarterback that has, let's say, not maybe been at Buckner's level, but maybe they've been at like the 8 to 10 range quarterback level, we'd be talking about a team playing this weekend in the playoffs. We'd be talking about a team that have just won the AFC South, and we'd be certainly talking about, more than anything, we'd be talking about a future franchise that is on much, much more solid ground than it currently is on. And I guess that comes back to positional value. If you get the same level of play at quarterback that Buckner's given you at defensive tackle, Frank Reich is still here. Chris Ballard's still here, and you could argue those extensions they got a year and a half ago might look pretty darn good.
And warranted.
Yeah, and warranted, as long as that quarterback was on the trajectory of how you view a Herbert, how you view a Tua. Again, Tua if healthy, considering his concussion situation. So I guess that's where I'm at quarterback. I know it's a lot of different avenues that we just went down. I think he understands the magnitude. And honestly, Irsay will probably be a mandate with quarterback more than anything. I could totally see that happening. But it does feel like I finally realized that we have the 4th overall pick. If we don't take a quarterback, that's pretty dumb.
Yeah, I'm going to pat myself on the back because I'm the first one on the pod who brought up the 2020 draft on the downturn and the spiral.
Yeah, again, when Andrew Luck shocks the world, Eddie, on whatever it was, August 26th, whatever the date was, and I saw Chris Ballard, I sat 4 feet away from him in that press conference. He was pissed, and boy, was he right to be pissed.
Yeah.
So, he wears his emotions on his sleeve. He said that yesterday. I've seen it firsthand. He definitely does.
We've certainly all seen it.
Great. We love passion, man. Again, fandom's awesome. I love passionate people. But once that venom, and honestly, maybe the venom still needs to be there. Once that venom starts to simmer, you gather as an organization and you say, guys, I don't care how good of a football team we think we have right now. That position means monumental proportions, whatever you want to say.
But the first thing he said when he got to Indianapolis was,
I know. It's not about one position.
Yeah.
I know. But that's what you got to say to your scouts. Again, this is where I'm confused because in Kansas City, they got together as an organization at some point and said, we're making rather routine playoff appearances with Alex Smith. And we have a brilliant offensive mind. But that's not good enough. So how do we get to the next level? And they said, we're going to be sitting at 27 in round 1. I think that's where they started.
Yeah.
And we're going to get it all the way up to 10, and we're going to keep it quiet and all these things. And I guess last thing on quarterback, unless you got any more to add, Eddie. you look at C.J. Stroud, you look at Bryce Young, you look at the draft position. I'll say this a lot over the next 3.5 months.
Don't forget Will Levis.
Will Levis as well. But I guess I'll slot Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud together because I think there's a little bit more consensus there. If they're considered on a tier by themselves, you have to go up to number 1 to get them. Because you know what Houston's doing at 2. And hell, if I'm Chicago, what I do is this. I trade back to 2. And then I see if I want to trade back again. Because what Chicago is looking at is they're looking at, all right, King's ransom for number 1. Who wants it? Houston has got 12 picks in this draft.
Yeah.
So they can give you some nice ammo just to move up one spot and get their pick of the quarterbacks. Again, I'm saying if teams view Stroud and Young on a very similar scale. Or I guess I should say if you view one a little bit above the other. And then if you're Chicago, you can sit there in 2 and say, we're going to take the best non-quarterback in the draft. Or they could trade back to 4 with Indy, and they could say, all right, we know quarterbacks are going to go 1 and 2. We know with pick 3, let's say that's Will Anderson out of Alabama.
Or Jalen Carter.
So that means they either get Will Anderson or Jalen Carter at 4, or, and I don't know if there's an offensive player that qualifies as this, Eddie, or they could get the best non-quarterback that plays offense. And again, I don't know if there's a player that necessarily fits that at 4.
Paris Johnson.
Yeah.
Skoronsky or whatever his name is.
TCU, wideout Johnston. I don't know if he's there, but that is an avenue. So I think Chicago sits in a beautiful, beautiful spot there. Anything else I missed?
Odds on favorite here for number 1. This is on FanDuel. Bryce Young -110. C.J. Stroud +200. Jalen Carter and Will Anderson are both +500. And yes, one final thing that you did not like, paying Jonathan Taylor top dollar no matter what.
Weren't a lot of personnel questions yesterday, rightfully so. Usually it's a big presser where we ask about pending free agents, and I don't think there was one question about any of the free agents, and I don't fault. I guess I'm trying to stand up for my colleagues here. I don't fault my colleagues. We have other Ballard pressers between now and free agency, so we can ask them about that. But
I do wish you guys would have asked him about Zaire, because I would have been interested to see what he would have said.
The season he had.
Yeah.
The mood, man, it just didn't even feel like you could go down that path.
Oh, I totally agree with you guys.
And he's typically gone an hour. I mean, he still went 45 minutes. It's an extraordinary amount of time. But there have been end-of-year pressers where he's like, I'm not leaving until you guys are done asking. He wasn't in that mood. I mean, he still talked, and I was very appreciative of his time and did text him afterwards telling him thank you for that. But on the I guess there were 3 personnel questions.
Taylor and Pittman?
Taylor, Pittman, and Ryman.
Yeah.
So let's start with Taylor. We pay great players great money. It's the same sort of answer he gave about Braden Smith and Darius Leonard a couple of seasons ago.
Shaq.
Well, I guess at the time, Darius, yes, Shaq. When those extensions came. I don't believe that. I don't love that, but I think we can accept reality. He's going to pay Jonathan Taylor pretty good money.
You mean you can also make the argument that Zach Moss looked pretty darn good, and that's the reason why you don't need to pay a running back top dollar.
Zach Moss and Kwity Paye have some of the biggest upper leg thigh action in the non-creepiest way I can say that. Quads, that would be the body description. Thank you for the body part on that.
Upper thigh action.
Yeah, no, probably not my best effort there, to say the least. It sounds like he won't need surgery. Ballard didn't know that for sure, but he said, it kind of sounds like that with Taylor's ankle surgery. So, again, if past precedent is anything, Jonathan Taylor will get a contract extension, probably late summer, and it will be notable running back money. On the Pittman front, and Ballard and I think align on Pittman. I love how tough he is. I love how he plays the game. Love how passionate he is. At a position where sometimes you question guys' passion for the game, I don't think you have any doubt with Pittman and how he plays. Now, as Ballard pointed out, is he a guy that every time he touches the football, you feel like he can take it to the house? No, he's not there. And the whole number 1 debate. I think when people say, is he a number 1? What they really mean is he a top 10 wideout in this league?
That would qualify as a wide receiver 1.
That's what they mean. When people say, is he a 1, they don't mean, are you the best wideout on your team? Because obviously Pittman is that. And Pittman would be the best wideout on a couple of other teams in the NFL. I'm not acting like he'd be on a lot of them, but he would be on a couple of others. I think Ballard realizes that Pittman didn't reach his full potential, and there were some drops, and there were some issues that he had himself. I think quarterback play held him back as well in getting to that level. So I'm interested to see how the Pittman extension will play out. Again, that position, we saw it last year, and I don't know. Are we going to have to wait for Justin Jefferson to set the market? Jefferson's got because same draft class.
You're Pittman's agent. Hell yeah, you are.
Jefferson's got the fifth-year option. How much does Cincinnati pay a T. Higgins? He's in that draft class, one spot ahead of Pittman, so there's a little exact comparison there. So I'm very curious to see how that will unfold because, again, past precedent, Ballard has proven, Leonard, Braden Smith, Nyheim Hines, if you exceed your value on your rookie deal, I'll extend you before the end of your rookie deal. And Taylor and Pittman go into the final years of their contracts right now. And then Ryman, he feels like he can be the left tackle of the future. And I think late in the year, we saw enough from Ryman to understand where Ballard's coming from with that answer. As Ballard pointed out, he's got to get stronger. Don't deny that at all.
Yeah.
I think he does. But this is a dude that played 2 years of tackle at Central Michigan. There was going to be growth. And I feel like I don't think you totally cross left tackle off your sheet, if you will, of offseason priority. But I think you do move it down a notch or two. Yeah. I still think drafting a tackle at some point or making a free agent move there makes a lot of sense. Someone called into our show earlier today. It was David. David's a truck driver. His favorite highway is 65 South. David brought up an interesting point. He brought up Peter Skoronski, who you mentioned earlier from Northwestern. What if you drafted him, moved Braden Smith? I think he thought Skoronski at left tackle. Then you move Braden Smith inside to guard. You think back to earlier in the year when they moved Braden Smith to guard, a big reason why they did that, it was only for a game or two, is because they thought they were getting manhandled at guard. They just thought they weren't strong enough, just like too weak. Getting run over at guard. And again, Braden Smith has more of the guard background than Ryman. I think we got to I think we really got to stress that point. I hear so many people say, move Ryman to guard. Ryman's got no guard history.
Yeah.
He was a tight end turned tackle. You leave those dudes at tackle. Braden Smith is the guard turned tackle. He's got more of a guard body on him. He has some history there. I would say a lot of history there in college. Obviously, really none in the NFL. Again, I don't like taking tackle in the top 10. But it was an interesting point that was brought up. So, knowing Ballard, it's probably something we shouldn't totally rule out.
Because he was asked about that, right? It was like, should fans not be surprised or something if you did not take a quarterback at 4?
Again, how much is that Ballard just trying to be funny and trying to play a game of poker?
Probably a little bit of that.
We're going to get a lot of poker. And if the Colts are doing their job right, Eddie, we won't know at all who they like.
That's true.
I mean, I'll never forget that Kansas City traded up to get Mahomes, and all of a sudden it came out like a couple weeks later that New Orleans really wanted him. And they're like, man, where did that come from? It came from Jordan Spieth being in the Saints draft room that night, and the Saints being mad when Kansas City came screaming up to get Mahomes. And Spieth asked around. They're like, yeah, we really liked Patrick Mahomes. We were going to take him here. And
Jordan Spieth,
the golfer.
Really?
Yeah, I guess he was close with Sean Payton, or maybe it was another golfer, Ryan Palmer, who was friends.
I figured it was the golfer. I was just making sure you were doubling down on the right name.
Yeah, Jordan Spieth, and then it came out, a few days later, and the Saints were like, and this was the Saints saying this before Mahomes obviously had, unfolded his NFL career like it did. So I think the Colts are open-minded to Ryman as the permanent left tackle, and I think they have. I think there's merit to believe that. And if they're right, huge. That is huge, Eddie Garrison, in crossing off a need that is very important right now.
All right. I know we went a little long there with what we liked, didn't like, and before we got into Twitter questions, so you ready for those now?
Yeah, yes, sir. Let's do them.
Matt is up first. What sense do you get that Jeff Saturday will be the coach next year and the Colts will trade up or draft a quarterback?
Okay, Matt, I'm back. Again, I'm a little back under a coin flip. Now, Jim Irsay
makes the final call.
he can re-woo you, man. Think about the X. It's talked you back into it. Hell, there might be some actions that have talked you back into it. But in this case, I
nicely done.
I think it's just words, but that's where I'm at. The other question was what? Trade up?
Trade up or draft a quarterback.
Again, so much of this is an unknown, and as I just said, if the Colts are doing their job, we won't know. But at this point, I'd be very surprised if the Colts did not walk away with a quarterback in the first 4 picks of the draft. If you feel like Bryce Young and or CJ Stroud are in a tier, or you think one quarterback is above the other, any of them, throw Levis into that group, which I know would scare a lot of people, but throw Levis into that group. You will not hear me. You will not hear me on April 30. I've almost said 31st. There's definitely not 31 days in April. You will not hear me on April 30th, Eddie, say the Colts are idiots for trading up to the first pick. I am not this believer of that's too much to give up for if the player is the right player and that player literally touches the ball on every single play, you go get him. You cannot sit and wait. You cannot, I hear people, Stroud will be there at 4. That's the risk you want to take? How about Seattle sitting there at 5, Eddie? Seattle's got the 5th pick and they got the 20th pick.
Mm-hmm.
They have another one. And what happens if Seattle loses on Saturday? And Pete Carroll says enough is enough. And they bring in some young offensive mind to be the head coach. And they say, Geno Smith, great season. But, man, we got the 5th pick and we got the 20th pick. And we feel like we can move up into the top 3. As much as people think Chicago wants Kenny Moore, I'd argue Chicago probably wants the 20th pick more than they want Kenny Moore.
Yeah.
When you're talking trade packages and all that, the fact that you have an additional first-round pick in that draft, in that same draft,
very beneficial.
Very beneficial to your trade package.
Jacob is next. Are you worried about the first round of coaches that the Colts are interviewing and have not even reached out to Jim Harbaugh yet? I would prefer Harbaugh, but if not him, I'm hoping for others with better resumes than these current 4 or 5.
Where are we at on this Harbaugh front?
I'm in no.
No, as in you don't want him, or
I'm a no. I do not want Harbaugh.
What is he doing? Is this agent driven? Did you see the report from Carolina
that he's not even interviewing with them or something like that?
Or they had that brief discussion with him after some convincing from the Harbaugh camp, or after Carolina listened to convincing from the Harbaugh camp.
I didn't see that part. No.
Yeah, I'm very confused on the Harbaugh front. Is this purely contractual? Mel Tucker makes this amount of money at Michigan State. It's a joke that I don't make that amount of money. I would understand Harbaugh having frustrations there. The game of college football certainly changed a whole lot.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, but I am very confused on that front. There was a report out there that Ed Dodds, number 2 in line here in Indy, is a big fan of Harbaugh. And
Harbaugh's a big fan of Dodds.
Right. And that they could have been paired up together in possible places in previous years. So does that come into play there? I don't know what's going on there on the Harbaugh front. He's a unique cat, Eddie. He's a really unique cat. The NFL success he had was pretty incredible. It was also about a decade ago.
Yeah.
A whole lot's changed. How would he handle this? And again, he did that with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick, who, both those guys played pretty good football for him, but you don't view them as, he had Peyton Manning. So I'm very interested to see how the Harbaugh thing plays out. I'm maybe not as fully anti him as it sounds like you are, but I also am not you hire Harbaugh, have the parade tomorrow.
Right.
I don't think it's an absolute given. And then there is the elephant in the room of what happens to Ballard. Does Harbaugh want contractual control?
Yeah, just also to
personnel control.
Just want to throw this out there too. So I know Ballard had his press conference yesterday, but his previous the previous person in his position was fired on January 21st.
Yep. Yeah, season ended January 8th. Ryan Grigson was fired January 21st. So, and that one, it wasn't like it occurred and we want the head coach to have more personnel control,
Yeah.
It seems to be if Jim Irsay would have to fall in love. absolute love with a candidate, I think, for that to happen.
Cameron is next. With the franchise at an all-time low, years into a failed quarterback carousel, is there any other option than trading up to the first overall pick to get Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud? Just doesn't seem like this is an opportunity that can be wasted. I just hate that Chris Ballard never seems to want to make a big move like that. And he was asked about that yesterday.
Yeah, and again, to your point, Eddie, that you made earlier, there was some conviction behind him in mentioning that he'd be willing to trade up to the first pick. Wasted opportunity. I could not agree more with that word. It is an opportunity that can't be wasted. And I just don't think you can sit on your ass and think that quarterback's coming to you at 4. And I guess Miami did that with Tua, and the Chargers did that with Herbert. I think another thing to mention about the Bears, big yawn from me, apologies on that. There's the Matt Eberflus connection, but Chris Ballard and Ryan Poles work together in Kansas City. I think it's worth pointing that out as well. I mean, those are the two that'd be doing the business together. Oh boy, that sounded awkward. I guess I'm channeling my Chris Ballard.
You get off on that too, KB?
With that statement. Well, no. Difficulty in transitioning from that, but we will. There is a connection there, so that would help the Colts. I don't know if Chicago cares about it to this degree, but like, if you were to trade the number 1 overall pick, wouldn't you want to trade it to an AFC team? Like, I don't think it's the end of the world if you traded it to an NFC team, but I think ideally you would do that. But man, if you are Chicago, I would hold that thing until 7:44 on Thursday night, the final Thursday in April, and just say, who's desperate? How desperate are you? I mean, if it turns out in NFL circles there is a tier 1 of Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, and Will Levis falls on tier 2, you could dangle that pick.
Oh, yeah.
How wild would it be if they fall in love with a quarterback and they say Justin Fields is up?
Oh, my.
Is that the most absurd idea in the world?
I don't think it's the most absurd idea, because that roster itself is, it's about 2 to 3 years away, and you reset the clock at quarterback in terms of contractually.
Yep, I think that's a very good point to make. You have to trade Fields for some
and you'd be able
draft capital.
Right, you'd be able to trade Fields probably for a first-round pick and maybe a third-round pick.
And should we mention that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus were not with the organization when that pick was made?
Bingo.
And that stuff matters. People
it's like
have
the
egos.
Holy Trinity.
They want their guys.
Patrick is next. Question I wish you would ask when given the opportunity. Chris Ballard talked about how the organization, quote, post-mortems everything. What are some examples they identified areas they should have or could have done something different that haven't been publicly scrutinized?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to go back and vet like every Ballard press conference, but I feel like for the most part, when Ballard has publicly said this is an area of need, they've gone out and addressed it. Again, like his words need to like say that for them to then follow through on their actions. I mean, you brought up John Bostic earlier. I mean, that one stands out to me a lot. I mean, he roasted the defensive talent he felt like was here when he took the job from
was Papa Mike here with him?
Mike Adams?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Mike Adams,
I know Mike Mitchell was.
The Trent Coles, the Mathises, the Waldens, those types of guys that were still around. And obviously they made a big scheme change, so that contributed to a lot of it, but the personnel as well. So Patrick, I'm sure you can find instances where Ballard has said something in January or February and then his actions in March or April have not. I mean, for example, one that I can think of is, last year at the Combine, the Paris Campbell comment of we can't act like he's number 2 or 3 on the depth chart. Well, then they acted like he was 2 or 3 on the depth chart. Now, again, credit to Paris Campbell, who, obviously some luck was on his side, but what an unbelievable season he had in just staying healthy and producing at a nice clip, for sure. But yeah, I feel like for the most part, he follows through on his words.
First of all, thanks for all the work this season. This is from Daniel. This is by far the most fan interactive of my favorite Colts podcast.
Oh, I love hearing that, Daniel. Thank you. You know me, baby.
We appreciate it dearly.
Available, informative, interactive. Those are the 3 goals.
Keep up the great work. First question, who deserves the most blame for this season from the following? Please order the blame from least to most.
Ooh, okay. So we got a list coming?
Frank Reich.
Get the pen and paper out.
Chris Ballard. Jim Irsay. Jeff Saturday. Matt Ryan. Carson Wentz.
Ooh.
And the guy who catches a stray bullet every time Chris Ballard talks, Andrew Luck.
He did mention Luck, right? I think that was a question that I asked him about trading up for quarterback. Wow, that is a long list. There are some interesting names on that list, Daniel. Tremendous work with that. I start with Jim Irsay. He oversees it all. He ultimately signs off on everything.
So that's the most...
I would say the most to blame.
Okay.
Next on the list would be Ballard. I really had no issue in Luck retiring. The timing of it, I do think, was unfortunate and put the Colts in a poor situation. I'd probably put Luck third. I put Reich fourth. Matt Ryan fifth. Carson Wentz sixth. Jeff Saturday seventh.
I slide Andrew Luck down to 6 and move every...
You go that low?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't...
Because, I mean, the Luck's problems weren't as a result of Ballard.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I probably have Luck a little bit too high. I could not believe that Ballard said yesterday we thought Carson Wentz would be the guy for 5 to 6 to 7 years. Like, it's rather shocking to me that Frank Reich and Chris Ballard, for lack of a better term, just ignored what the Philadelphia Eagles were telling you about Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
Like, I've said this numerous times. Follow this timeline, Eddie. Carson Wentz signs a $140 million deal. I think it was like... Let me just look it up.
2018?
I was going to say after the 2018 season, before 2019.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? Plays the 2019 season, was fine. I think that was that the year where they had like the late season run to the playoffs? If I'm not, they like won their last 4 games or something like that.
Something like that. You got a concussion.
Wentz played pretty good football for them. They're late. I'm going to look this up to make sure I have everything right. But basically, he signs the extension, and then you go out there and you draft Jalen Hurts. And, okay, he signed the extension with the Eagles on June 10th, 2019. So before the 2019 season,
yeah,
he signs the $128 million deal. 2019 season plays out. Wentz was fine. Played pretty well. Late season success. Get to the playoffs. You know, all of those things. Happy and merry. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he played all 16 games, 9-7, made the playoffs, 27 touchdowns, 7 picks. Fine year. They come back in 2020.
Did you say 27-7?
I know. Ironically enough, he's done that twice in his career. I definitely did not do it this year. Boy, he's thrown 7 picks in 4 of his 7 NFL seasons. That's kind of wild. He comes back in April, Philly, and they draft Jalen Hurts, 50th something pick.
Yeah.
So, like, they gave him $120 million in June. They play that fall, go to the playoffs with them, and then in April, they're drafting a quarterback in the second round. 2020 season plays out. Wentz leads the league in interceptions. Doug Peterson's fired. Wentz is available, and the Colts make a move. Like, whoa, I mean, I don't understand how, for an organization that Frank Reich just came from, he can sit there and say, yep, they were wrong, I'll be right. They drafted Hurts before he led the league in interceptions.
It's that spiritual connection, man.
I don't know if you're totally joking on that or not, but I think, yeah, I agree. I think there's some truth there. Yeah, and maybe not, spiritual connection, deep connection, however you want to call it. I don't want to act like, if you have some religious connection, you can't separate that. I think that's an area that Frank struggled in, is separating relationships from the business decisions.
On Monday, January 9th.
And how does Ballard agree with that? Sorry to interject, Eddie, but
yeah.
Teams in the league will tell you what they think about their players.
Uh-huh.
They will tell you, and they know. I mean, they are inside the building. Frank Reich, the last time he was with Carson Wentz was 2017. We're talking 2021.
Yeah.
That's a long time in the football world.
So on Monday, January 9th, putting the date out there just so that in case you're listening to it later this week or whatnot, I was producing the Fan Midday Show with Charlie Clifford and Brendan King. We had David Kaplan on from ESPN 1000 in Chicago.
Yeah. Iconic name.
And the Carson Wentz name got brought up. I don't know how, but back when that whole rumor mill was starting of him being talked about going to Chicago or Indianapolis, I guess Doug Peterson went to Chicago to talk to Matt Nagy. It was during training camp or something. I can't fully remember. And I guess Peterson told Nagy, you do not want anything to do with this guy. Stay away from him. So they didn't pursue him. Next thing you know, he ends up in Indianapolis, and look what happened.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Doug Peterson and Frank Reich appear to be close. They walking on the Monon last year during training camp. Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
I don't know if this is your doing or Rasmus's doing, but I appreciate giving the pronunciation.
Oh, is this our Denmark?
Correct.
Yeah, this is all, I think it's Rasmus, right?
Rasmus, correct.
This is Rasmus letting us know the proper pronunciation on that.
Oh, muchos gracias.
I don't know if that's Danish or
that was Spanish.
Whatever language spoken over there, but good work.
Hi, Kevin, longtime listener. First question. Thanks for a great pod. I come from Denmark. No, IKEA is not the capital. And do you know the capital, Kevin?
Oh man, is it Copenhagen?
It is indeed. Look at you.
Geography was a strength of mine back in the day.
The only reason why I remember Copenhagen is because of the tobacco.
There you go.
And your show really makes me feel close to the city of Indianapolis.
Rasmus, let us know your connection, Andy.
Yeah.
I'm kind of be curious about that.
2 questions / trivia. 1.
Okay.
Can you name the 2 Danish NFL players of all time?
Oh.
One is currently playing for the Browns. The other is a Hall of Famer. He doesn't even give me the answers either, so I can't tell if you're right or wrong.
Yeah. Jakob Brissett, is he from Denmark? I got nothing. Boy, one is a current Cleveland Brown.
Yes.
Yeah, watch a little bit of Cleveland. Is it a lineman? Is it? I got nothing.
I don't either. Do you know the one that's in the Hall of Fame?
No, neither.
All right.
We're gonna need Rasmus to give us a little bio on himself next time on the pod, and also give us the answers.
I don't even want to try to say this guy's name.
Is this the Cleveland Brown or the Hall of Famer?
The Cleveland Brown.
Okay.
I'm going to try it, though. Hjalti Froholt. Hjalte is the first name. Froholdt.
What position?
I do not know.
Wow. You say he's got an actual question?
Yes. Number 2, how much do you think it would cost to get the number 1 pick? I say we just do it. Go get our guy. Best. Rasmus.
Well, thank you for that. Again, would they want a player? I think that's such wishful thinking that Chicago's going to want to eat some big contract. So
Morten Anderson.
Really, from Denmark? He went to Ben Davis for a year as an exchange student. I should have known that. That's pathetic by me.
From Copenhagen.
Unbelievable. Okay, what would the Bears want? They would want 435, right? Isn't that those are the 2 picks you have, 4th overall and 35th overall?
Yeah.
That's your second rounder, and I think a future first. I think that's what they would want. And honestly, I think that's fine. I think that's acceptable. I don't think it's an extraordinary asking price. I think that's the cost of doing business. So yeah, I don't. Obviously Matt Eberflus likes some Colts defensive players, but Ryan Poles also signing off on that. I don't know if that's a guarantee.
Sorry, I got a text from my boss.
No, everything good? Jeez.
Yeah, he just wants me to make sure I do something. Working with Scott Pollard today.
Ooh, nice. How many more we got?
Let's see. 1, 2, and 3.
All right, let's get through these so we can get it posted.
Damon. My buddy and I noticed something at the stadium on Sunday. It was the quietest I've ever heard it at Lucas Oil Stadium at times,
God, it was
even more than the preseason. I hate to admit it because the Patriot allegations of the past, but Lucas Oil Stadium definitely pumps in crowd noise. On third downs when they show the decibel meters and ask the crowd to get loud, the fake noise seemed really obvious to us. Is this normal procedure for stadiums? Wondering if you noticed anything as well besides the audio being generally off today anyways in the stadium.
Yeah, I mean, as expected, it was one of the most pathetic environments I've ever been in. You know, part of what helps an environment, though, is a good road crowd. Just to get a little bit of that. I mean, hell, the loudest part of the game was the wave. When Sam Elliott got to the line of scrimmage, I thought he was going to have to go silent count there. Impressive wave a couple times. I think each NFL team's allowed. I think there was like a decibel level you're allowed to get to. So maybe there is something like that. But yeah, I mean, it was a morgue on Sunday in there. Library. And again, rightfully so. I'm not faulting fans. I thought it was a strong preseason crowd. About 80% in there.
Creighton, what is your next head coach wish list? Mine is... He's got like 6 S's on this, so I try to do my best there.
There you go.
Number 1, Eric Bieniemy. Number 2, Jim Harbaugh. 3, Kellen Moore. Leslie Frazier, 4th. All the way down to number 35. Jeff, it's not Sunday, it's Saturday.
I would put D'Amico Ryans high on my wish list.
Bingo. Me too.
Brian Callahan, Cincinnati's a bit intriguing to me. I'd kick the tires on Brian Flores.
He's getting an interview with Cleveland
for the DC job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little confused why Brian Flores' name is not being thrown around there from a head coaching standpoint. Yeah, I was talking with someone yesterday, and I guess next podcast, Eddie, we can get a little bit more into the candidates because, again, I don't think it's going to be a quick process. So I think we can kind of wait on that.
Sure.
Talking with someone yesterday, coached in the league for a couple decades, several teams, and this person described Raheem Morris as the best combination of human and coach that he's been around ever in the NFL.
Interesting.
You know, Raheem Morris took that job in Tampa at the age of 32. I'm 33, or am I 34? I'm 33. I can only imagine how much my head would be spinning at that age, and I feel like there was a lot of like Tampa's like, we're gonna hire your coordinators for you, like they like holding his hand, and like he's firing his OC before the end of the preseason, just like not a good process for him. Not just learned a lot obviously since that all unfolded. He's also, him and Gus Bradley coached together for a little bit. So if you want Gus around, maybe that's a possible DC under Raheem Morris. The Ben Johnson, the more I read about Ben Johnson, Eddie.
Didn't Ben Johnson also have some experience with Bradley, or which of the there's somebody else because there was 2 candidates.
So Bradley's experience would be Jacksonville, the Chargers, and the Raiders. No one jumps off the page at me with that. Feel free to look that up. Ben Johnson, I get some Brad Stevens vibes.
Really?
Super brainiac. I get some Brad Stevens vibes. Computer engineering, mathematics major, brilliant mind. I mean, the Lions finished 3rd in points scored, 3rd in yards, and 5th in points scored, and they traded away T.J. Hawkinson. I mean, yeah, that's big time. So I'll go there on the wish list front.
Big Bama is the final one. With offensive line, and how fitting, Big Bama asking an offensive line.
I love how Big Bama loves the line play.
With the offensive line having a down year and you having to make decisions on Ryan Kelly, the right guard, and possibly left tackle, which do you think is the best option to draft an offensive lineman with? A 2nd-round pick, or look for a veteran lineman to help in free agency? I like what I saw from Bernard Ryman the last couple of weeks. I think he took a couple of steps forward and can be a solid left tackle.
Yeah, again, I would probably opt for a little bit more free agency on the competition front. I would agree with Ryman. I'm curious what happens with Brian Kelly. Do they view Danny Pinter as an option? I mean, it's the same regime. It's a regime that's always really liked Danny Pinter. Does Danny Pinter at center have any sort of a different opinion than Danny Pinter at guard? That's a question that I have on that front. Again, we're in the offseason.
Shane Steichen.
Say it again. Shane Steichen.
Gus Bradley.
Ooh. Oh, Chargers.
Yep.
Makes sense. All right, Eddie. Weekly pods in the offseason. That's the plan. Obviously, emergency pods will inevitably have to occur.
Right after we record, probably. You'll be at home, and you're like, frick.
Frick is a good word to use there. We'll come at you next week, get into a little bit more of the candidates, maybe take a look at the Colts free agents, how they should react to some of those. Tons of written content up on our website, 1075thefan.com, to hopefully keep you satisfied on that end. He is Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bone. Everybody have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.